is going on out there, peeps? Okay, for so long we've been hearing in the whole Nicera Jacera arena that there's going to be debt forgiven. They're going to erase your mortgage, your student loans, your credit card bills, and that they're going to pay you back, the taxpayers. A bunch of money is just going to magically pop into your account, along with about a billion other kooky stories that are out there. And I think it was yesterday I posted a video that Nicera Jacera had actually landed in news. Yes, I encourage you guys to go back and check it out if you haven't already. Because there was a woman named Miss Lou who decided she wasn't going to pay her mortgage no more. She was convinced that her mortgage was paid off by Nicera Jacera. So go watch the video if you haven't to find out what happened. So I've said this a million times since I started talking about Nicera Jacera. I suggested that people stop focusing on the name Nicera or Jacera because that doesn't matter. What mattered the most was the items that were on the list. People had somehow, some way gotten away from the other items and just focused on debt relief. And I understand why. We're in some crazy times. I had made the suggestion that even if we did get some type of debt relief, it'd be more like a debt jubilee and not Nicera Jacera. Well, with everything that's going on around the world, we know that the World Economic Forum is trying to do this whole one world government, one world currency, enslave all the people around the world. And I've been asked many times, how are they going to enslave everybody, Pimpy? By printing mass amounts of money. The irony in all this is they don't actually print the money. It's digital. They just get on the computer. So I'm not sure how anybody could be liable for that. Well, whatever their plans are, it doesn't seem to be going as smooth as they anticipated, as more and more people are wising up to what's going on, and the jab isn't working as effectively as they thought it would, at least not yet. You're starting to see citizens rise up against their governments, overthrow their governments, and now are demanding some serious things from both the IMF and the World Bank, knowing that they are responsible for what's going on, along with the World Economic Forum. Multiple country citizens are now demanding a debt jubilee. That's right. Before we get started, hit the thumbs up button. If you're not a subscriber, please do so, because when you do, it helps out the channel, and I certainly do appreciate it. If you're thinking about buying gold and silver, and you should, because you need something outside of the system until all the dust has settled. So when you go to buy your gold and silver, go to our friends over there at Money Metals Exchange. The link is down below in the description. If you're a first-time buyer and you spend more than $100, use promo code Pimpy, P-I-M-P-Y, and you will get a free half ounce of silver. So many of you might not know this, but Sri Lanka, they had a protest and then overthrew their government. What had happened was their government decided to go with this Green New Deal or whatever the heck it was, and made the farmers change fertilizers. And the fertilizer ended up killing all their crops, which once again leads into their purposely trying to starve us. Again today, by the way, there was another food processing plant that magically caught on fire. Around the world, there's been close to 350 food processing plants, along with farms that have chickens, cows, ducks, turkeys, all had their animals killed, claiming that they have some type of new variant of bird flu. Sri Lanka is the latest to start demanding debt jubilee. So more and more countries are jumping on this. Now, I do understand there is a trap by the World Economic Forums to force everybody to turn over all their personal property in order to get the debt jubilee. Don't fall for it. You don't have to take it. As a matter of fact, we can enforce our own debt jubilee. It says a call for debt justice, debt cancellation, and transparency in IMF negotiations in Sri Lanka. The Coalition for Economic Democracy in Sri Lanka is a group of concerned academics, activists, agriculture, fishery, and industrial workers, students, business persons, trade unionists, and professionals based in country and overseas, including the diaspora, who oppose the values of the economic rights and justice in public policy making. Now, what I want us to be careful about is as these countries, each one start to go down the same path, be careful with which group of people we align ourselves up with, because this coalition for economic democracy sounds awfully close to the Center for Economic Democracy, which is funded by George Soros. So anything that Soros is involved in, we don't want. In the wake of 2 years of economically devastating RONA lockdowns, quantitative easing, and money printing globally, we call on the international actors to heed the people's demands for a debt jubilee and cancellation as a priority. Again, they're not the only country to do this. What needs to happen is everybody just needs to stop working at the same time. That would seriously throw a wrench into what these people are trying to do. Only essential workers should work. Then you just march on your capitals and then demand a debt jubilee. It says, we wish to draw your attention to the key issues regarding the current debt crisis and its social, political, and economic impacts, which are not adequately represented in public discussion, yet crucial to the well-being and security of Sri Lanka's citizenry. See, that's the thing. That's where governments have all of a sudden stopped including us in our decision-making. They just decided to start doing things on their own. So there's a call for debt justice. International support is welcome to ease the economic burden on the people of Sri Lanka, which includes shortages of fuel, food, and medicine that impact livelihoods and health, increase in poverty, and equality. Now, the reason why this wording is concerning to me is the World Economic Forum, part of their mission statement, that their goal is to erase all these things. So you see, they cause the problems and then try to offer you the solutions. And then one of the solutions is that we stop eating the food that we are and start eating bugs. Yikes. The other thing they want us to focus on is health and poverty and equality, which is on that website. So when I see stuff like this in the article, I'm concerned that this is part of the overall World Economic Forum. So if we get to this level, we have the right to ask for debt jubilee. Just don't align ourselves with any type of organization, especially when it's sponsored by Soros. It goes on to say, however, due to an international sovereign bond, debt trap, and depreciation of the Sri Lanka rupee against the US dollar, sustainable solutions are needed rather than a short-term sale of strategic assets that benefit the ISB holders and hedge funds that sustain dependent development. Every country is having this problem. Every country. They get themselves into debt thanks to the RONA. The IMF says we can help you. They end up issuing some bonds that are bought up by people like BlackRock, and then their currencies are devalued. We're seeing it everywhere. It says in May-June 2022, Sri Lanka debt was estimated to be 51 billion, with current debts of 5 billion to be paid to the ISB holder and hedge funds like BlackRock. See? So BlackRock was a chosen corporation to buy up everything around the world, and they work hand in hand with the World Economic Forum. Once the right people get into office politically, we need to dissolve that company and force them to sell the assets back to the people. They secured huge United States government COVID bailout funds to asset-stripped and impoverished countries around the world during the economically devastating RONA lockdowns. Contrary to widespread media disinformation about the sources of debt and the causes of the default, this is the first time that Sri Lanka, in April of this year, defaulted as an independent state. It is the debt owed to ISBs that amount to almost 50% that has caused a default at the time. The Asian Development Bank and World Bank have indicated willingness to roll over its multilateral debt. So too the bilateral debt holding Asian countries, including Japan, China, and India. Along with debt cancellation, there is a need for de-dollarization and trading in a basket of currencies. The loss of such autonomy and sovereignty due to the ISB debt trap and the International Monetary Fund's stepping in to devalue the currencies is at the root of the current shortage of food, fuel, meds, fertilizer, gas, etc. Not to mention them trying to force us in this Green New Deal that's causing a lot of these problems as well. Purported shortage of exorbitantly privileged dollars is the most devastating impact of the entire stage default. While the return of stolen assets by I can't pronounce the name of the family, some who are U.S. citizens, is vital. We believe that there is an even greater need for debt justice, a debt jubilee, and debt cancellation, as the current international financial architecture is not fit for purpose, particularly the IMF, which works for the global 1% and imposes austerity on the rest. You can see right here it says Sri Lanka IMF negotiations inherently unequal, but not just with Sri Lanka. Remember when I talked about the Iraqi dinar and the IMF and the World Bank kept offering to come in? I said, no, don't deal with them. That's like dealing with the devil. The gross lack of transparency in the ongoing negotiation between the IMF and the government that lacks legitimacy but purports to represent the citizen is a consequence of the inherently unequal relationship between the Sri Lanka and the IMF, where the United States and former European colonial powers have overwhelmingly decision-making power, while the IMF demands transparency and that all creditors be treated equally. The names of the ISB holders behind the Sri Lanka default are a closely guarded secret. These people are purposely tanking economies around the world is what they're doing. I'm going to skip down a couple of paragraphs. I will leave the link for you to come and read the whole thing if you want. But it starts right here where it says, we consider the people's sovereignty and national policy autonomy is being undermined through non-transparent deals with politicians who are not democratically elected and have a history of amassing odious debt, the burden of which citizens are being forced to bear, particularly notable on the accumulation of odious debt are the current odious newly appointed prime minister implicated in the country's biggest financial fraud over the central bank's bond scam, and the president, a U.S. citizen until 2019, whose family wallows in nepotism. They are now negotiating with the IMF to sell national assets. When I was talking about the Iraqi dinar, I said this is what these people do. They get in there and they rape countries of their resources. Is what they do. And they do it by keeping the currency low as well. That Sri Lanka family is being protected by the Democrats at the moment. So we have the same problems as they do over here. So you should pay really close attention to the tactics that are being used against these people because, believe it or not, they're doing it here. It says there is a clear pattern of disinformation, exaggeration, and fear generation regarding Sri Lanka's debt and local and global media messaging. This understates the intrinsic wealth of the nation, its strategic assets, and the strengths of this country, given the failure to differentiate between illiquidity and insolvency. In the context of the proposed IMF fire sale of assets and state-owned enterprises, they're doing the same thing here. The IMF's traditional approach to debt restructuring through privatization of SOEs, austere measures, and fire sale of assets of countries merely causes more problems and places the burden on the poor, as evident from Argentina to Greece and Lebanon. However, odious debt is the outcome of speculative and reckless ISB lending, sans due diligence to governments that lack legitimacy and are known to be corrupt. That's what happens. These powers that be put corrupt people in charge in politics. We have that now. That's why they hate when outsiders get in there, like Trump. And then they turn around and they protect the corrupt with their law enforcement, which is sad. Somebody like the FBI. In fact, the IMF, which works for the global 1%, is part of the problem and not the solution. So too are processes of datification, manipulation of matrix, indices, and algorithms to ensure pumping and dumping of countries into the MIC debt trap based on dubious ratings, LDCs and HIPC status, and Paris Club solutions of asset stripping of countries. Does this sound familiar to you guys? The manipulation of our assets, pumping and dumping, cryptocurrencies, gold, silver, stocks, bonds. This is how they strip the money away from the poor people. And then the generations end up enslaved trying to pay this debt off. So this article is talking about what's going on in Sri Lanka. In case you haven't figured it out, it's the same everywhere, including the United States. Any bailout of the country should not lead to bailing out of the corrupt political and bureaucrat elites and related oligarchs whose policies, corrupt governance, and deals have caused the present crisis and unprecedented scale in our country. The international institutions and people in Sri Lanka should work together to ensure that these elites are held accountable and promptly dealt with. Yeah, I support that 100%. And until the rest of the citizens around the world demand the same thing, it's going to continue. And even if you could shut them up for a while, they'll just turn around and regroup and come back later once they figured out a whole generation of people had forgotten about what happened. Anyways, like I said, I will leave the link for this article so you can come back and read the whole thing. It is very eye-opening. For those people who are not paying attention to what's going on with the rest of the world, you can easily read this and see how it pertains to our country here. So I'm going to scoot down where it starts talking about sustainable solutions. It says, we seek much more debt relief and demand debt justice. While the crisis in Sri Lanka is being framed as a humanitarian disaster, it is quite clear that it is more complex with economic, political, social, and geopolitical dimensions and dynamics. Solutions must hence be daily designed, tailored, and targeted to improve the lives of the most vulnerable and to restore sovereignty to the people of Sri Lanka and their state, as well as all other countries. So here we go. What do they say? We demand a debt jubilee and to write off the odious debts held by ISB debt holders like BlackRock that also holds Adian stock, that engage in reckless lending, that has debt trapped several countries, including Sri Lanka. The coronavirus saw the greatest transformation of wealth in human history from the bottom of the economic ladder to the top. We call on the government to urgently begin a process of de-dollarization and trade in the basket of currency that promotes South cooperation and responds to the needs of the aspiration of the Sri Lanka citizenry. The relevance of the current international development agriculture for Sri Lanka and other debt-trapped countries in the global south must be questioned. Sri Lanka needs to reconsider its relations with institutions like the IMF, the World Bank, the OECD. Question Sri Lanka needs to reconsider and the Paris Club of donors in a matter that affirms, not dismantles, its sovereignty and policy autonomy, both exercising the ability to negotiate as an independent country, free of the IMF conditionally and the U.S. sanctions, and working in the interests of its citizens. See, that's the problem. This is why people are getting away from the U.S. dollar as a reserve dollar, because the United States has been used enforcer for the World Bank and this Great Reset. If countries did not cooperate, they would suffer from sanctions. If not sanctions, invasions. There'd be one reason after another. Says we call on the government to immediately stop all initiatives and actions underway for the privatization of strategic assets, including lands, airports, ports, telecom frequencies, transport and energy infrastructure, and reverse all actions already commenced or implemented as valuations did not consider the island's geostrategic value and security concerns. Every country needs to create one of these. You have got to get the people to unite. They're doing everything they can to divide us and keep us distracted. It says we call on the government to develop a national energy and food security policy, take a full cognizance of the current global energy wars, geopolitics, and climate catastrophe, discourses that force small states to bear the carbon cost of the global military business industrial complex. Of utmost importance to ensuring food security is the maintenance of the food supply chains and prioritization of fuel for the fisheries and agriculture sectors in the context of fuel rationing, nationalization of taxation, and targeting the wealthy to enable the most vulnerable groups such as farmers, fishers, precarious workers in the informal sector, and small and medium term enterprises to regain their livelihoods. In the absence of such a policy, climate narratives like the rush to green energy and organic fertilizer without the adequate transition plan and transfers of technology, given the island's tiny carbon footprint, has contributed to significantly the current fuel, food, and economic crisis in Sri Lanka and other parts of the global south. Again, people, this we're talking about the debt jubilee worldwide. Something has to be done. The fifth and final point says this: the strengthening of our governance and government institutions is paramount to address the effects of the RONA lockdown, which gave rise to the pandemic of corruption and the lack of accountability due to national institutions and oversight agencies being deliberately under the guise of lockdown holidays due to the staged fuel shortages, decentralization, and inept digitalization. Services like public transportation can be improved through more energy efficient and environmental friendly measures, including the abolishing of duty free car permits for politicians and a privileged professional class. Finally, there is an urgent need for a buy local consumer education programs that citizens support local industries and manufacturers and the environment. Yes, heck yes, that's what I'm talking about. That's what needs to be done everywhere, not just in Sri Lanka. I'm going to leave a link for this. This is going on everywhere, you guys, and people are rising up demanding this. We just have to be careful about who's behind it. We should start forming groups in every nation and start getting the citizens to wake up to this and start demanding this. A debt jubilee for sure. Anyways, that's it for now, you guys. I appreciate you guys tuning in. Let me know what you think down below, and I will catch you later. I'm out.